We've seen sort of like, it's like this missing puzzle piece a lot of times, or even though we're getting positive information about the economy, voters still don't feel good. If people just feel bad, even if the metrics are telling us things aren't bad, does it feeling bad hurt Harris just because she has been in this administration for the last 4 years?
In today's economy, voters' vibes battle with clear-cut data. This is bizarre. It's not connected to reality, and the Wall Street Journal is exactly right. It's so much misinformation spewed out there that people are believing the lies, even though their own economic situation is good.
But was it? Was their economic situation good? Because it turns out their economic situation wasn't good. And the metrics that were being utilized to determine whether or not the economy was working well on behalf of the American people were not the right metrics to focus on. In fact, they were skewing the economic outlook to make it appear as though things were much better than they really were. And Democrats called it a vibe session and accused people of not understanding how good they had it when Joe Biden was president. So let's get to the details of what was really the case. So look, if you go by the traditional economic metrics, unemployment rate was at a mere 4.2% in November. Real GDP rose 12.6%. Productivity improved, and inflation fell from 7.2% in June of 2022 to 2.4% in November of 2024. But Eugene Ludwig, who's the chair of the Ludwig Institute, he named the institute after himself, didn't he? It's okay, I'm not judging, but Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity, and also a former US Comptroller for the currency, disagrees with the whole vibe session narrative. And he talks about it in his latest piece for Politico titled, "Voters Were Right About the Economy, the Data Was Wrong." And look, this is something that drove me crazy as well. And I wanted people to understand. And when I say people, I don't mean voters. I mean the people in positions of power, the Democrats, the media. You guys are focusing on the wrong metrics. And when you tell people who are struggling economically that they just need to shut up and feel grateful for how awesome the economy is, that leads to political backlash. And I think Democrats suffered from that in this last election cycle. So at the Ludwig Institute, he assembled a team of researchers to delve deeply into some of the most frequently cited headline statistics. And what we uncovered shocked us. The bottom line is that for 20 years or more, including the months prior to the election, voter perception was more reflective of reality than the incumbent statistics. But not because of some nefarious plot. He says that the data that was collected by government agencies was accurate and that most of the staff at these agencies were well-intentioned, but the filters used to compute the headline statistics are flawed. As a result, they paint a much rosier picture of reality than bears out on the ground. So let's start with unemployment. He uses unemployment as an example of a statistic that does mislead in multiple ways. So first, it counts as employed the millions of people who are unwillingly underemployed. That is, people, for example, who work only a few hours each week while searching for a full-time job. Second, it does not take into account many Americans who have been so discouraged that they are no longer trying to find a job. Finally, the prevailing statistic does not account for the meagerness of any individual's income. Thus, you could be homeless on the streets, making an intermittent income and functionally incapable of keeping your family fed, and the government would still count you as employed. So that's how the statistics get skewed. And I have more examples that were provided in this excellent piece that I highly recommend you guys all read. But John, I want to stop and get some comment from you.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I think it, as you pointed out, like, you use the metrics you have, but you should also always be hoping that they will be the best. You should be updating them and all that. And it's sort of, for years we've gone back and we've said like, very often these analyses will focus on like whether the stock market is doing well, which is an indicator of the economy, but also pointless for people who don't have any stocks. Like, it's what do you include in your equation is super important. And so they should definitely update that. What the Biden administration could have done is, at the very least, so long as those metrics, even if flawed, are consistent over time, you could potentially talk about improvement. But don't tell people, like to what Joe Scarborough was saying, regardless of whether you think the metrics are good or not, it's hardly a good strategy in any event to tell people that they're wrong about their perception of their own economic situation. Like, how the hell could that possibly ever work? That said, there is definitely a component of how people feel about the economy that isn't 100% about their own raw evaluation of their own condition. And we can see a version of that play out basically every time power switches hands. I mean, you've probably seen the charts where like people's evaluation of whether the economy is good, like Democrats after Trump won, it nosedove, and for Republicans, it went up. They didn't suddenly get richer. I mean, Elon Musk did, a few of them did, but most Republicans didn't get richer, but now they suddenly think the economy is better, even though it's from one day to the next. Now, you have to dive into all that. You have to see what they think about their own condition, what they think about their area, and also the country at large. And with all the money they have flowing in these campaigns, they should be able to do all of those and tailor their messaging to fit.
Yeah, and look, I will say this. After a newly elected president gets inaugurated, the partisans and hyper partisans who supported that party that is represented by the president are gonna have, they don't wanna say anything negative, right? They're so elated that they're going to support and say glowing things about the economy because they wanna support the guy they voted for. But I think an important indicator of how Americans, including Democrats, were feeling were the polling that ended up showing how terrible Democratic voters are feeling about their economic situation while Biden was in charge. And so it was frustrating to hear from members of the media and Democratic politicians who just kind of brushed that off and pretended as though these were people who didn't know what they were talking about and the economy is great. And by the way, I think part of the problem is, especially in Congress, we're talking about so many millionaires who are so disconnected from what Americans are experiencing on the ground. And I think that disconnect makes it difficult for them to message about what the reality is, right? Or even acknowledge what the reality is. And by the way, if you filter the statistic to include unemployed people who can't find anything but part-time work, or who make a poverty wage, roughly $25,000 a year, the unemployment rate or the percentage is actually 23.7%. That is insane. That's insane. So think about that and compare it to the mere 4.5% unemployment rate. In other words, nearly 1 of every 4 workers is functionally unemployed in America today. Hardly something to celebrate.
Yeah, it's definitely an opportunity for the Democrats to learn something, which I'm sure they won't. It's a warning to Donald Trump. Like there are a lot of people who are actually suffering. And I know he's hoping that all of them will be bought off by propaganda, that, if they end up having to spend 30% more for groceries in a year, well, whatever, it's the Gulf of America, so yay, awesome. I mean, he thinks that's gonna work. I assume people are a little bit more pragmatic about that. They're gonna see that things financially are worse for them. That number is not gonna suddenly, evaporate, that 23%. And so, he can play all sorts of games. They theoretically will vote next time around. Midterms tend to be bad for the party in power. And that's a big group of people that he could really be angering with some of his economic policies.
That's very true. So we'll see how that plays out. But I want to get into one other element of this piece, and it has to do with wages, the money that Americans are earning. So Ludwig says those stats related to wages are also skewed and misleading. The prevailing government indicator, known colloquially as weekly earnings, tracks full-time wages to the exclusion of both the unemployed and those engaged in typically lower paid part-time work. Today, as a result, those keeping track are led to believe that the median wage in the United States stands at roughly $61,900. But if you track everyone in the workforce, including part-time workers and unemployed job seekers, the results are obviously different. So our research reveals that the median wage is actually little more than $52,300 per year. American workers on the median are making 16% less than the prevailing statistics would indicate. And his models also go into inflation and how it's actually much worse than we're all led to believe. So please read this piece. It's in Politico and it's excellent. And it's one of the rare instances where someone actually took the time to be real about what Americans are experiencing with our economic situation. And it feels good to be heard, to be seen, because I think a lot of American workers have been ignored, neglected, and made to feel crazy over what they have experienced on the ground.
Thanks for watching the video, guys. We also love it if you hit the join button below, because that makes you a member, and members allow us to be independent, honest. We can be as progressive as we want, no corporate media influence, and that's all because of you guys. We love doing the show with our members. Hit the join button, become one of the Young Turks.